Hi, I'm Brandon Crowe, Superintendent of Great Hearts, Arizona, and we're joined here today by Professor Andrew Porwancher from ASU. Andrew, could you tell us a little bit about your background and what you're doing most recently?
Sure. So I am a professor of constitutional history at the School of Civic and Economic Thought and Leadership, which is a mouthful. We
Yeah.
abbreviate it to
Skettle.
We
That's right.
abbreviate it to Skettle. Everybody says Skettle. And I also am the director of the graduate studies program, where we offer a master's degree specializing in great books geared towards classical school educators.
Terrific. Yeah, which we have a number of our own Great Hearts faculty and students who are part of the program Andrew leads. So,
Yeah.
Terrific. Thanks again for joining us. We just wanted to talk about a few things. One thing is definitely thinking ahead to next year about classical education, the American experiment. Part of while we have you here, we thought we could ask you about is just to share a little bit about what kind of education did the founders themselves have? What were they benefiting from and carrying with them as they did all their work in founding and establishing our country?
Yeah, well, there's a real natural affinity between classical education today and the kind of education that the founders had. When you think about the political leadership of the founding era, they're coming to the classics from different angles. Some are going to preparatory academies where they were being steeped in not just Greek and Latin, but in the civilizations of ancient Greece and Rome, the poetry, the history, the philosophy. Some of them are getting private tutoring. Some of them are autodidactic, they're self-taught. Alexander Hamilton, for instance, had been largely self-taught, and then although he was brilliant, because he needed a firmer grounding in the classics, he actually spends some time at a preparatory academy before he goes on to college.
Oh, wow.
And so we have a disproportionate number of the founders are classically educated. And so they are studying Cicero, they're studying Polybius, they're studying Thucydides. They are deeply versed in these materials even before they get to college. And then when they go to places like King's College, which becomes Columbia, or the College of New Jersey, which becomes Princeton, or William and Mary, where Jefferson went, they are only broadening and deepening their understanding of classical antiquity.
Got it. Are there maybe themes or particular instances or examples that you see them drawing on from their own education when they're wrestling through the various matters and issues in the founding?
Absolutely. When Americans prove triumphant in this improbable victory against the British Empire, they secure their independence, and they turn to the task of self-governance, the founders are looking directly to Greece and Rome for both lessons, positive lessons, and cautionary tales as they try to craft the American state. That's particularly true in the summer of 1787 at the Constitutional Convention, but that's true throughout the founding period. And there are some key themes that they derive from their classical education. One of them is the importance of divided government, the idea that you have different elements of government acting as checks on one another. This is part of the genius of the framers' creation. Another is the importance of civic virtue. You can have democratic institutions, but you need a democratic culture that those institutions can channel. And that culture has to rest on civic virtue. And so the framers are very much alive to that. And they're also very steeped in the natural law tradition. When we think about the Declaration of Independence, Jefferson says that we are endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights. These are natural rights. They are pre-political rights. They aren't rights that are just given from one body of men to another body of men. And this natural rights tradition has clear origins in classical antiquity. And so there are so many dimensions in which a classical education is informing their approach to creating the American Constitution and the American state. And when you look at something like the Federalist Papers, the most important sources we have rallying people in favor of ratification of the Constitution, they are just dripping with references to classical antiquity.
Interesting. I think of what in 2025, what we're trying to do with students, what classical educators are trying to do. We're trying to make sure that our students today are receiving some element of that education that the founders themselves had.
Yes.
But then we're also wanting to steep ourselves in what the founders themselves are writing and studying. And then we're kind of adding to that things even since the 18th century. So I don't know, as you've been a professor and had students and studied yourself, do you have a sense of what are the important components of that blend? How do we get antiquity? How do we get the kind of early modern, and then as Americans even kind of what's happened since the founding of our nation? How would you, I guess my question is, what would you recommend for that young people study?
Yeah,
today?
I mean, all of the above,
okay.
right? And so, when we look at the debates around American independence, when we look at the debates around the American Constitution, we need to understand those classical references to understand the water that these founders are swimming in and the kinds of arguments that they're making. And so it's important to read the 18th century sources in the context of the classical sources. And one thing that I really like to do in the classroom is not just assign, the Constitution and the Declaration of the Federalist Papers, but also the rebuttals that were circulated through the American colonies. There were rejoinders to the Declaration of Independence. There's a whole canon of anti-federalist thought that opposed the Constitution, and many of the thinkers who ended up being on the losing side of these historical debates are also steeped in classical antiquity. And so I like to give students both sides of these arguments and understand that while today there's unanimity that the fight for independence was a worthy cause, and that the Constitution is, as its history tells us, the oldest surviving constitution of any country anywhere in the world. It's been a remarkable success. And yet, in the moment of creation, these were deeply divisive topics. And so I try to teach that debate in the classroom, and when I can, do it in this context of classical antiquity that is shaping that debate.
That's wonderful. Got it. Well, thanks so much for being with us. Again, Professor Andrew Porwancher at ASU with Skettle. And we're looking forward to continuing to do wonderful work with you, and then also looking ahead to our symposium for next year on 250 years, right? So terrific, looking forward to it, and just thanks for your time.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Great.